Okay, hi everyone. So today we are going to go over section 3 of chapter 7, and we're going to be talking about the subregions or regions of Canada. So just like with the United States, you know how we have the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, and the West. They're kind of broken up too, but instead you have the Atlantic provinces, which are on the east. Then you have the core, the heartland, and that's Ontario and Quebec. Those are the two provinces, and that's where all the major cities are, with the exception of Vancouver. And then you have sort of the prairie provinces, and this is where you have Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And then they've kind of linked together British Columbia with all of the territories, most likely because it's so very remote. So let's get to it and see if we can go through it fast. I know that there are 69 slides on here, but don't let that scare you. We're going to go through it pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk about first the Atlantic provinces. We're going to be going from the east to the west. So these are the Atlantic provinces, those that are on the east coast right there on the Atlantic Ocean. You kind of have the Gulf of St. Lawrence right there where the St. Lawrence River dumps into the Atlantic Ocean. But that's where Quebec is, but it's not considered the Atlantic provinces. So you have Newfoundland, right? And it's good. The more you hear this, the more you're going to know. So this is Newfoundland, and it's got those areas right there. So that's Newfoundland there. And then also Prince Edward Island, which is really small, right in the middle. And then you have Nova Scotia here, and then New Brunswick here. So these are small provinces. It's the smallest area of all of them in Canada, and it doesn't have that many people either. So you can see here it's a better sort of image at it. They've blocked off Newfoundland, but you can see New Brunswick. Let me see if I can find this here. New Brunswick in the yellow, which is located right here. Right, so there's New Brunswick there, and the capital is Fredericton, which is located here. And then this right here is Prince Edward Island. To get there, I don't know if there's a bridge or not, to be honest with you, but I'd love to go and explore this. But their capital is Charlottetown, which is located here. And then down here, this is Nova Scotia, and their capital is Halifax. For any of you who are going to take AP US History with me, we talk about it when the British evacuated from Boston. They went up here to Halifax. So this is up here is Newfoundland, and that's another area up to the north, and the capital is St. John. They've got a couple of different locations there. I mean, by saying that, I mean it's separated, and it's not all one land mass. It's quite a few land masses. Okay, so if you look at the geography there, as I said, it's all on the Atlantic Ocean. Another thing that they call it, and I've seen in our previous geography books, are the maritime provinces because that of or having to do with commerce on the water. The Appalachian Mountains actually go right up into New Brunswick, and some of the territory there is in dispute between Maine, the United States, and Canada with New Brunswick. So it goes up there. There's lots of ponds and lakes. It's going to look a lot like New England, right? When you go up there, lots of harbors, good fishing. Okay, also icebergs, especially up there in Newfoundland. This is the Trinity Bay iceberg. There's so many icebergs, they name them. This one, as you guys probably know, the icebergs are much larger below the water than they are above, but isn't that just beautiful? Okay, and then they also, if you look at this, this is a citadel. That's a former British fort right there, shaped like that. You could also see those in Boston. So that's what the British had. This is Halifax. That's where the Brits evacuated to during the Revolutionary War. Okay, and then how quaint is this? Look at that bike path going along. This here is a village in New Brunswick. That'd be super cool. Here's a lighthouse out there. You can see the craggy coast, very rocky. That's indicative too of New England, the Appalachian Mountains. Right, and then this is also the site too in Newfoundland where the Vikings went and lost the meadows, like in the year 1000. Okay, these are the smallest provinces, only like 5% of the land and 8% of the people. But this is a population density map. So look at this right here. At least in this area, it's pretty densely populated as it is in this part of Newfoundland. Up here in this part of Newfoundland, though, there aren't very many people because it's just so remote and so cold. Okay, but they do have some things that go on here. You know, the poorest, even though they're not really poor. They have fishing, so fishing is very important there because they're located on the Grand Banks. There's some lumbering, mining. Also, you do have some of the defense industry because of where it's located there. Canada doesn't have a big military like we do, though. There's some mining that takes place there too, copper, zinc, lead, shipbuilding because of where they are. And then they also have some of the short, fast moving rivers. So you have hydroelectric power as well. Okay, so these are the Grand Banks, and this is an area right there off the coast of Newfoundland that we share with the Canadians by treaty, even though they're closer to it. But Maine would be located right here. So this area along here are the Grand Banks, mostly right there. That's well known for fishing, right, throughout the world. And so you can get all sorts of fish there. So that's one of the biggest industries, right? There's lots of bays, inlets, harbors, just like it is in New England, right? And as I said, maritime, that's a term meaning bordering on or related to the sea, especially when it comes to commerce, right? A lot of people live along the coastal areas just because it's so nice and it's convenient, and that's where transportation links were. Okay, let's move on now to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River provinces. These are known in your book as the core provinces. So you've got Ontario and Quebec. Quebec is the largest of them. This is also the core of the population and of economic activity. So that's why they call it core provinces. In our previous book, they called it the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River provinces. Okay, that's also the heartland of the country because 62% of the population live there, and most of those people live along the St. Lawrence River and very close to the United States. It makes up 20% of the land area. Quebec is the largest of the provinces, right? This is also where the Europeans first settled. You have Cartier who came down there and established a fort, but the permanent settlement was built at 1608 by Samuel de la Champlain at Quebec. And that's just 1 year after the British had established Jamestown in Virginia. Okay, so the population density map right here, this shows you exactly, or it shows you how populated those four metropolitan areas are. So all the way from Toronto, that is located right here, right, moving up to Quebec. So that's where we get some densely populated areas in Canada. So remember the mnemonic technique I taught you to, Tom Q. So it goes Toronto, then Ottawa, which is the nation's capital. And Toronto is Ontario's capital. So it's Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec. Quebec is Quebec's capital. Okay, so I'm moving around a lot because my family is making noise. Anyway, if we're looking at this region, which is known as the core area, remember, the majority of the population is located down here, right by the United States, St. Lawrence River. Very few people live in the northern areas up here of Ontario or of Quebec, because this right here is the Canadian Shield. It's higher up there, so it's colder, but also the ground, this is rocky, so it's not very productive. So there's really nothing up there, where you can eke out a living. So you got the Canadian Shield. It's cold, it's poor soil. They do have mineral deposits, as it says right here, but that covers most of the territory. Where most people live are down on the Hudson Bay actually along, not the Hudson Bay lowlands, but along the St. Lawrence River. The Hudson Bay lowlands, that's just along just the coastal areas of the Hudson Bay. Again, very few people live there because it's swampy, it's rocky, and that sort of thing. Most of the population, 60%, live down along the St. Lawrence lowlands, right? Rich soil, mild climate, and so historically that's where Canadians have settled. All right, so what makes this so important in this region is that there's good transportation links, and historically it was the St. Lawrence River and then it was all the Great Lakes, but then the St. Lawrence River was connected through the St. Lawrence Seaway. Remember, where you get the whole lock and dam system that moves from the St. Lawrence River, Canadians Highway to the sea, all the way through the Great Lakes, right? Lake Superior, Lake Ontario, and you know, Lake Erie even. So you know that I'm kind of obsessed with all of this with the different lock and dam. So in the next few slides, you're going to see some more images that you've already seen. Right, you can see how boats coming in from the Atlantic Ocean or leaving, right? If boats came in the Atlantic, they can go here past Quebec, right? And then move on down. You go through a lock and dam system right here, and you keep going. You go into Lake Ontario. Now, in between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie is the Niagara River. So if you go over here to the west of the Niagara River, there's another lock and dam system. You're gonna go by Toronto, right? Because Toronto is right here, right? Montreal is here. Quebec is here, right? So you're going to move along through Lake Erie, and then you're going to go through a system right here, and this is the Strait of Detroit, near Detroit. And then it's going to go up here. You can go into Lake Huron, and there's another lock and dam system where you climb up into Lake Superior. You could also go this way into Lake Michigan. You can trade with Chicago. Now, there used to be a system where you could get the canal that would take you to the Illinois River. They no longer use that. But like I said, I have a fascination with this. Right, and then here you can see as you climb up, you really climb up here, right, going from Lake Ontario into Lake Erie. And of course that too, it's going along parallel kind of to the Niagara Falls. That's why you have the Niagara Falls right there. You get a little bit of a climb too right there from Lake Huron into Lake Superior. Okay, and here's another look at it. Right, again, here's the Welland Canal. You just really take that jump up or down, depending on which way you're going. Right. Okay, so here, this is the heart of Canada because you've got agricultural activity. It's not all of it. Most of that takes place in the prairie provinces, but 35% is respectable, right? But there's mineral production too, but the main thing is manufacturing. Most people in Canada are involved in the service industry, though. This is also the political center because you have the nation's capital, which is located at Ottawa. All right, agriculture in Ontario, that you do have rich soil there, and this shows some of the things that you have. But if you look at it in comparison, here's British Columbia, right? Here's Ontario right there, and here's Quebec. So it shows like red meats. The provinces, though, the prairie provinces, they're the ones that produce most of the agriculture. So you do have some red meats. You do have dairy. And some other things. But when we get to the prairie provinces, that's where they have most agriculture. Manufacturing is big, cars, food, clothing, but even with the North American Free Trade Agreement, just like it hurt the United States, it also hurt Canada. A lot of those manufactured goods started to be produced in Mexico because it's much cheaper to produce there. But they do produce like oil and natural gas. That's become very important for Canadians. And then extraction of other materials, gold, minerals, zinc, other minerals, you know, and then lumber, fish, that sort of thing. All right, so if we look at the cities in Ontario, Toronto, it's the capital, right? But Ottawa, that's the nation's capital that is in there. It's unlike here in the United States where Washington, D.C. is not in a state. They do have their nation's capital in a province. But anyway, the largest city in Canada is Toronto. That's 1/3 of Canada's largest corporations, banks, financial centers, commerce is all taking place there. It's the 5th largest city in North America. So you would have in the United States, New York, and then LA, and then Chicago, Houston, and then Toronto. It's number 5. So if you look, Houston and Chicago are right there together, so that could change. Ottawa, big city also. It's very quiet. I went there one time actually. I've never been to Toronto, but I've been to Ottawa. It's on the Ottawa River, along with Hull, which is another town that it runs into. It's the fourth largest city in Canada, but you'd have to add Hull in there. If you didn't, then it would probably be Vancouver. Okay, and here is a map of Toronto. So I don't know if you guys watch HGTV, but I do. But the Property Brothers used to do all their changes there. So it's located right here on the northern side of Lake Ontario, right there. Right, so over here, this would be the United States. All right, and then here's the nation's capital. It looks very different from our capital, doesn't it? Ours is white marble. So this is Ottawa, and they've got these canals there in the street. It's reminiscent to me of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, to have the canals right there in the water like that with houseboats lining the sides. Okay, and then in Quebec. So Quebec, the province of Quebec, this is the largest province in Canada. Most of the people live along the St. Lawrence River. A lot of people don't live up in the north because you got the Canadian Shield, and that covers 4/5 of the northern region. That's that hard bedrock up there. It's really wet and soupy because the water can't drain, right? So there's a lot of bogs and everything else. If you go further, there's wilderness and it's tundra. You do have farming along the St. Lawrence River, though, but that's where all the major metropolitan areas are as well. Right, and you could see, again, the population density down in this part of Quebec with very few people living up here, right? Nobody lives up there, right? And that's because of the Canadian Shield. That's that big Precambrian rock that's right there. It's pictured in the red, and it circles the whole area. So it's just with all that rock, then nothing really drains. You've got thin soil. It's just not very good for production, but there are minerals there. All right, major cities in Quebec. You have Montreal and Quebec. The largest city in Quebec is Quebec. So it goes, then the largest cities would be the first one, Toronto, and then Quebec. Or I'm sorry, Toronto, and then Montreal, and then Quebec, and then Ottawa and Vancouver, Ottawa with Hull, right? So the largest city in Quebec is Montreal, but it's the second largest in Canada. You've got rapids right there. It's beautiful. They speak French there as they do in Quebec, right? Most people speak it. A lot of people in Quebec, the province, speak French and English, right? But Quebec City is the capital of Quebec, and as I told you before, that was established by Samuel de la Champlain. We went there, and it was very European-like. You've got the cobblestone streets and buildings that had been around for several hundred years, and it's just very charming. But then you also have the new part of the city as well. So you have the modern part and then the old part. Okay, and you can see where those cities are located again along the St. Lawrence River right here, right? This is Quebec right here. You can see it's a very modern city, which you see in the top right. But you go into the bottom left and the bottom right, you can see the old part of town. Right here, there's a cliff right there, and you can go up. You can take like a trolley that goes up there, and I think that's the Plains of Abraham are up on top. That's where the British defeated the French in the French and Indian War. Okay, and then this is Montreal. Like Quebec, it has its European charms as well, but it's a very modern city as well too. The top picture shows its old sort of historic sector, and then the bottom right, it shows the more modern part of Montreal. And then these are the prairie provinces. So remember, if you've got BASMOC, right? So this is the B for British Columbia, and then A for Alberta, S for Saskatchewan, M for Manitoba, Ontario, and then this would be Quebec before you get to the Atlantic provinces. So here you have Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and they're located between the Rocky Mountains and really between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Lakes, or well, I guess the Great Plains too, as they move up the Rockies. Okay, and so here's an image that looks like it could be like North Dakota, South Dakota. Wheat and other grains are very important there, especially down in the southern part. So in the southwest part of Canada, here between the Rockies and the Canadian Shields, you're going to see rolling fields with a lot of wheat. You know, you do have some lakes and rivers, especially, well, all over actually. There's badlands that form sand dunes, and it's kind of a continuation of North Dakota, South Dakota as it moves up there into Canada. All right, here are the badlands. This is in Alberta. Right, so we have the badlands also, South Dakota, North Dakota. All right, so here are all the different lakes. This one right here, Lake Winnipeg, is huge, right? A lot of people go up there for its freshwater fishing. So there's a lot of fishing that takes place there. Right, so down here, this shows where a lot of soil is very rich, and this is a lot of agriculture goes on. You also have some big cities. Here's Regina, Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, Calgary, and then also Edmonton in Alberta. So those are the major cities. Winnipeg, I guess, I don't know that it's very big, but that's the capital of Manitoba. Okay, so if we look at the cities, the way that they developed is along the railroad. So with the railroad, you had the railroad, a northern route that went up here and eventually went to the coast, right, of the Pacific. And then another route that ran down here through Regina and Calgary, and then eventually went to the Pacific down here at Vancouver. And along the way, you're going to get these cities that develop as they move westward, right? So that's very similar to what happened here in the United States. You just get this development of cities along the railroad lines, and then later too, as the interstate came in, then that happened as well. So they're located in those areas. Okay, and this is another way it shows you. So you got Winnipeg down here where the railroad took off from, right? Trying to find my thing. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, so then you have Winnipeg down here, and then as you move up in the northern route, there's Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, and then Edmonton right here, right? And then Calgary on the lower area, and then Regina as well. So if we look, Winnipeg is the capital of Manitoba. Regina is the capital of Saskatchewan. And then if you go over to Alberta, Edmonton is the capital of Alberta, but Calgary is a large city. Okay, so Winnipeg, as I said, this is the capital of Manitoba, and this is where the two railroads set out on, one to the north and one to the south, moving along there. So it grew for that reason. So now I want to look at a few of the cities in the Prairie Provinces. This one I just mentioned, Winnipeg, which is the capital of Manitoba, sorry. But anyway, it's named after a Cree word that means muddy waters. So as you can imagine, look at this province. Look how many lakes there are there. And just like the Great Lakes or Minnesota, a lot of these lakes were left behind as a result of the last ice age, right? And then Regina, this is the capital of Saskatchewan. If you go further north, then you could go to Saskatoon, right? So it's located on the railroad between Winnipeg and Calgary. Second largest city in Saskatchewan. Saskatoon is the largest. Okay, and here is Calgary. It's the largest city in Alberta, but Edmonton is its capital. So it's a modern city. It's up there. To me, in northern Canada, right? It's up there. It was along the northern railroad route, and it's known for a lot of winter sports and for ecotourism. And then Saskatoon. So this is halfway point between Winnipeg and Edmonton on that northern railroad, and it's located in the central part of Saskatchewan. It's right there. It's the largest city in the province, but Regina is its capital. Regina is down here. Okay, and then this is Edmonton. It's the northern route of the Rocky Mountains, or the Rocky Mountain route, moving up there, and it's the capital of Alberta, and it is it's got It's good, even though it's up there in the north. It has very fertile soil, but it has a short growing season, so that's problematic. Too, this was where people would leave off to go for extractive resources, whether it's going to be for oil or diamonds or I guess even gold, anything to go there because you're up there. It's a modern city, and it's the northernmost modern city in Canada. Okay, so what they have to do is adapt to the environment and look at this water park at the mall in Edmonton. That'd be pretty awesome, wouldn't it? It's just huge. Okay, so the economy here is really based on agriculture because they produce so much wheat. Wheat makes bread. This area is known as the bread basket, and so that's their major crop. It's transported by rail to the Pacific, to the Great Lakes, to the Hudson Bay, and from there it's shipped out to all parts of the world. Tourism is very important. It's natural beauty. You've got hiking, you've got lakes, fishing, all sorts of things, lots of different parks. They got a lot of natural resources as well, oil, natural gas, and coal. So 76% of Canada's natural gas is in these are is in these prairie provinces. Okay, so if we look at the Pacific provinces now, we're going to shift over. These are the last. We're getting there. So we're talking about here British Columbia, and then Yukon, Northern Territories, and then Nunavut. So this takes up 50% of the land, but it's sparsely populated because so much of it is difficult to live on. It's too cold, it's tundra, or it just doesn't have many natural resources. So it only has 13% of the population. But they do have 10% of production, mostly in mining, the natural resources from the mountains, the minerals. You've got logging, you've got fishing, you've got hydroelectric power because they have rivers. Some of them, though, are frozen for most of the year, so obviously they wouldn't make for good hydroelectric plants. Okay, so this is British Columbia, and there are some people who live up in the north, but they live kind of in the middle, right there along the railroad. Most people live down here where the climate is much nicer. As a matter of fact, they have a marine west coast climate, so it's a lot like that of England. It gets pretty mild. It doesn't get nearly as cold there as it does here in Illinois. And along this part of the coast of Canada, they actually have sort of temperate rainforest. It's not a tropical rainforest, but a temperate rainforest. So it rains all the time, and from that you're going to have different vegetation, a lot of ferns, a lot of very tall trees and everything, and it's quite beautiful in that area. Okay, so notice too that a good chunk of this right here, this is part of the United States through treaty. This is a very mountainous area. Because that's the Rocky Mountains, they dominate it. 3/4 of the land there is 3,000 feet above sea level. But there's a lot of forests in there, and so that's good for extraction of trees, lumber in there. There's a whole bunch of islands. Look at this. And so people who sail into these islands, this is called the Inside Passage, right, to get to all of those islands along the coast there. Okay, so they do have quite a few natural resources. If you look at this chart right here, they've got coal, copper, silver, zinc, gold. I don't know what molybdenum is. Maybe you guys do, but these are a lot of mineral wealth. They also have their forests, and they have salmon. So it's one of the wealthiest provinces, even though they don't have that many people there. It's very wealthy because the extraction of natural resources from the earth. Okay, and then we get the Northern Territory. So this is up there into Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Okay, up there, that's 40%, all these territories of the land masses of Canada. It's very sparsely populated. Not very many people live up there just because it's so cold and barren. There are some small settlements along various sources of water. So like the Mackenzie River up along the Arctic Ocean as well, so that different supplies can be brought in, or you could fish in the Arctic Ocean. Okay, this is a river up there. This is in the Northwest Territories. It's right between actually Northwest Territory and Nunavut, right there. Look at that. It's just treeless. It's just this huge plain. There's very little vegetation on there. Right here too, this is Yukon Territory with the Rocky Mountains. We've got some trees there. It'd be typical to see caribou in the area, which are very important to the indigenous population. And then check out this. This is, if you remember, a climograph. This one is showing temperature right here. And this is Yellowknife. To be honest with you, I don't remember what the blue or the red indicated, but this is all it is showing is temperature. So in the climograph, that's showing maybe, oh, I don't know what it is. But this is in Celsius, right? So you can see that the warmest time of the year is up here. If you convert this, that's about 61 degrees in Yellowknife, right? But if you look how cold it gets to about -18 in January, or, you know, down here in December, right? So I think that the average temperature per year is about 22.8 degrees. That's not very warm. Right, and here's a picture of Yellowknife. It looks very quaint, doesn't it? But look at this. These are rocks, something that we don't see much around here, right? Because it's up there, it's in the mountains. So you can see these rocks and trees, and then buildings are built into the sides of a lot of these places. All right, this is a very important waterway here. This flows north from here, the Northwest Territories, and it flows north up into the Arctic. So this freezes in the winter, and so this is a really good time to transport things. So what they do, they drive on the water when it's frozen like that, because remember, they can't build roads there because there's permafrost and it would get too slushy in the summertime, and it would fall apart. Right, so, and then you have up here in the northern reaches in the green area, that's where the Inuit live. Right, those areas, their capital, Illiput, is located like right here, right? But notice that they also extend over here into Greenland, which is not part of Canada. All right, so the Inuit, these are the indigenous people. Originally, they were called Eskimos, but what Inuit means is the people. If you're an Inuk, then you're an Inuit person, and I think their language, it sounds a lot like that too, Illiput. Something like that. Their language is what we would call Eskimo, but Aleut, Eskimo Aleut is there. And traditionally, it was all dependent upon the environment and extracting their sustenance from the land, mostly from whale, caribou, seal, walrus, but now they buy the market food. You know that from watching the video from section 1. Okay, so here's an Inupiat in a kayak. This is in Alaska in 1929, because they're up there in the northern part of Alaska too. I think that's just a really cool picture. I hope you guys appreciate it too. I'd love to have that kayak. And then here's an Inuit family about 1930. The modern Inuit has changed somewhat, right? I think this would be a lot easier, but for some, they probably would like the old ways a little bit better. He's on a frozen plain there. I don't know if it's water or not. Okay, there are other indigenous groups too that we oftentimes forget. So if you look down here, these are kind of the traditional tribes that the Europeans encountered when they came into what is now the United States, the Algonquin, the Iroquois. There'd be the Mohawk too. But then you also have the Cree, right, the Ojibwa, and then the Blackfoot and the Plains Cree, right? Different ones, very similar to what you had here. Along this area, the Pacific Northwest, they had different cultural aspects that were similar to those in Oregon and Washington. They built totem poles, which were an identifier for your family that you'd put outside of your home, which are, cherished in the Pacific Northwest. All right, so the natural resources are very difficult to extract. There's a lot of them, but it's difficult because it's so cold up there. And it's hard to transport because you can't build roads, but it's very rich in natural resources: gold, silver, zinc, lead, iron ore, other natural resources too, natural gas and petroleum. But again, it's hard to extract. The United States extracts oil from Alaska, and then we've got the Alaskan pipeline that comes down to the coast there near Anchorage. So they're trying similar things there. Okay, so here's one way to transport. As I said, that the McKenzie River ices over every year, so we get ice road truckers. You're going to love our last slide. Next one, and the final one for this chapter. Check that out. This guy, he was driving his truck along, and the ice cracked, right? So that's sometimes a risk you have to take. There used to be a show on TV. I don't know that it still is, Ice Road Trucker. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Next week, you'll have a study guide, a Kahoot, and then the test. And then we'll probably start working on just knowing locations in Central and South America to finish out the year. Thanks for listening, and take care, guys.